The forest swallowed us whole, its silence louder than the crack of a rifle. Ethan's shadow loomed ahead, his boots crunching through the frost-kissed leaves. And I followed, my heart pounding louder than our steps. By the time we reached the clearing, I wasn't sure if I was hunting deer or chasing something I'd never name. We'd been friends since high school, Ethan and I, two kids from a small Ohio town, bonded over pickup trucks, cheap beer, and dreams bigger than our dead-end zip code. He was the golden boy quarterback, prom king, the guy every girl wanted and every guy envied. I was Caleb, the quiet one, always at his side, sketching in notebooks and hiding truths even I didn't fully understand. 10 years later, at 28, we were still tethered, though life had stretched us thin. Ethan was a mechanic now, his hands rough from wrenches, his smile still bright but shadowed by something unspoken. I'd moved to Columbus, teaching art at a community college, my life a patchwork of half-finished canvases and late-night questions about who I was. This hunting trip was Ethan's idea. One last go before winter locks us in, he'd said, his voice crackling through the phone. I hadn't hunted since we were teens, but the way he asked earnest, almost desperate, pulled me back. So here we were, in the Hocking Hills, miles from anyone, with nothing but a tent, 2 rifles, and a fire to keep the cold at bay. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and the weight of something unsaid hung heavier than the November chill. We set up camp as the sun bled into the horizon. Ethan moved with purpose, hammering stakes into the frozen ground, his breath visible in the fading light. I watched him, my hands clumsy with the tent poles, distracted by the way his flannel stretched across his shoulders. You're useless, Caleb, he teased, glancing over with that crooked grin that always undid me. I laughed, but it felt hollow, my chest tight with a truth I'd buried for years. Gotta get the fire going, he said, tossing me a lighter. Our fingers brushed, and I froze, the spark of his touch sharper than the flint. He didn't notice, or maybe he did. His eyes flicked to mine, just for a second, before he turned away to stack the wood. I busied myself with the kindling, trying to ignore the way my pulse raced, the way his presence filled the clearing like the fire we were building. By nightfall, the flames roared, casting shadows that danced across the trees. We sat on a log, passing a flask of bourbon between us. The warmth of the liquor loosened my tongue, but not enough to say what I really wanted. Ethan talked about his shop, about a girl he'd been seeing, about how life felt like a treadmill he couldn't step off. I nodded, listening, but my eyes kept drifting to his hand, strong, calloused, gripping the flask like it was an anchor. You ever feel like you're running from something? He asked suddenly, his voice low, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw there, fear. Maybe. Or longing. I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the bourbon. All the time, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice. He didn't look away, and in the firelight, his eyes said something his lips never would. We didn't sleep much that night. The tent was too small, the air too thick with questions neither of us dared ask. I lay on my side, listening to his steady breathing, wondering if he felt the same pull I did. By morning, we were up before dawn, rifles in hand, tracking a buck through the misty woods. The hunt was supposed to be the point, but every step felt like a distraction from the real chase, what was happening between us, what we were too scared to name. The forest was quiet, save for the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. Ethan moved ahead, his focus sharp, but I could sense his tension, like a bowstring pulled too tight. I wanted to ask him what he'd meant last night, what he was running from, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I followed, my rifle heavy in my hands, my heart heavier still. We spotted the buck around noon, its antlers catching the sunlight through the trees. Ethan raised his rifle, his movement steady, but his eyes flicked to me, just for a moment. "You take it," he said, lowering his weapon. I shook my head, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of his gaze. "I can't," I said, and it felt like a confession. He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said, and we let the buck vanish into the woods. That night, the fire burned low, and the bourbon was gone. Ethan sat closer than he had the night before, his knee brushing mine. The silence between us was alive, pulsing with everything we hadn't said. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd spent imagining him, about the fear that kept me quiet, about the love that had grown like a weed I couldn't pull. But I didn't. Not yet. The second day dawned colder, the air sharp enough to cut. Ethan was already up, boiling coffee over the fire, his face unreadable in the gray light. I crawled out of the tent, my body stiff from the cold ground and the weight of last night's silence. We didn't talk much as we sipped the bitter coffee, the steam curling between us like a fragile bridge. I wanted to ask about his question about running, about what haunted him, but the moment felt too brittle, like it might shatter if I pushed. Instead, we packed up and headed deeper into the forest, rifles slung over our shoulders, the hunt a flimsy excuse to keep moving. The woods were denser here, the pines closing in like walls. Ethan led the way, his steps sure but his shoulders tense. I followed, my eyes tracing the lines of his back, the way his breath hung in the air. I'd always followed him through high school halls, through late-night drives, through the chaos of growing up. But now, every step felt like a choice, like I was walking towards something I couldn't turn back from. Around mid-morning, we stopped by a frozen stream, the ice glinting like broken glass. Ethan knelt to refill his canteen, and I watched the way his fingers brushed the water, deliberate and slow. "You're quiet today," he said, not looking up. "So are you," I shot back, my voice sharper than I meant. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment, I thought he'd push back. But he just capped the canteen and stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Got a lot on my mind," he said, and the weight in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to ask what, but the words felt too big, too dangerous. Instead, I nodded, and we kept moving. By afternoon, we'd seen no sign of deer, but the forest seemed to hum with its own life, birds darting through the branches, the wind whispering secrets through the pines. Ethan stopped suddenly, his hand raised, and I froze behind him. "Hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears but heard nothing but the pulse in my own head. He turned to me, his face close, his breath warm against my cheek. "Thought I heard something," he said, but his eyes lingered on mine, searching. The moment stretched, heavy and electric, until he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Let's keep going," he said, his voice rough. I nodded, my heart hammering, and followed him deeper into the woods. That night, we made camp by a small clearing, the stars sharp above us. The fire was smaller this time, the cold pressing closer. Ethan sat across from me, his face half lit, half shadowed. He hadn't mentioned the girl from last night's conversation, and I hadn't asked. But the silence between us was different now, charged with something neither of us could ignore. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Like, just packing up and starting over somewhere new?" I looked at him, surprised. Ethan was the guy who stayed through his dad's drinking, through the shop's slow months, through the small-town gossip that never let him breathe. "Where would you go?" I asked. He shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. Somewhere I could be. I don't know. Free. The word hung between us. Fragile and heavy. I wanted to ask what he meant, what he was running from. But my own secrets choked me. Instead, I said, I've thought about it. But I'd missed this. I gestured to the fire, to the woods, to him. He looked at me then, his eyes catching the firelight, and I swear I saw something shift like a door cracking open. Yeah, he said softly. I'd missed this too. We didn't say much after that, but the air felt different, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't see. I lay awake that night, the tent too small, his breathing too close. I wondered if he was awake too, if he felt the same pull, the same fear. The forest was silent, but my heart was loud, and I knew I couldn't keep running from it much longer. The third morning was brutal, the cold sinking into my bones like a warning. Ethan was quieter than ever, his jaw tight as he packed up camp. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words felt like stones in my mouth. We trekked deeper, the forest growing wilder, the path less certain. Ethan's focus was razor-sharp, his eyes scanning the trees for signs of game, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. I kept pace, my own thoughts a tangle of hope and dread. Every glance he threw my way felt like a question, every silence an answer I wasn't ready to hear. Around noon, we found tracks fresh, deep, leading toward a ridge. Ethan crouched, studying them, his fingers brushing the dirt. Big one, he said, his voice low. We're close. I nodded, but my eyes were on him, not the tracks. The way his hands moved, steady and sure, made my chest tighten. I'd spent years watching him like this, memorizing the lines of him, pretending it was just friendship. We followed the tracks for hours, the forest closing in tighter, the air growing colder. By late afternoon, we reached the ridge, a steep drop overlooking a valley blanketed in mist. Ethan stopped, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath visible in the chill. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, his voice softer than I'd expected. I nodded, but I wasn't looking at the valley. I was looking at him, his profile sharp against the fading light, his eyes distant but heavy with something unspoken. Yeah, I said. It is. He turned to me then, and for a moment, I thought he might say it's whatever it was that kept him up at night, that made him ask about running. But he just smiled, a small, sad thing, and said, let's keep moving. We didn't find the deer that day, but the hunt felt secondary now. Something was shifting between us, a current too strong to ignore. That night, we camped at the base of the ridge, the fire struggling against the wind. Ethan sat closer than usual, his shoulder brushing mine as he passed me the last of our coffee. You ever feel like you're not who people think you are? He asked, staring into the flames. His voice was raw, like he'd been holding the question too long. I swallowed, my heart racing. Every day? I said, and it was the truest thing I'd ever told him. He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine, and I felt the weight of a decade's worth of secrets pressing against my ribs. I don't know who I am sometimes, he said, his voice barely audible, like I'm playing a part. You know, for my dad, for the shop, for everyone. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him he didn't have to play anything with me. But fear stopped me, fear of what it would mean, fear of losing him. Instead, I said, you don't have to be anything you're not. Not out here. He looked at me, his eyes catching the firelight, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But he just nodded, his jaw tight, and turned back to the fire. The silence that followed was heavier than ever, filled with everything we weren't saying. That night, I dreamed of him, of his hands, his eyes, his voice saying my name. When I woke, he was already up, staring at the horizon, his face unreadable. I wondered if he'd dreamed of me too. By the fourth day, the forest felt like a mirror, reflecting back every doubt I'd ever had. Ethan was quieter still, his movements mechanical as we tracked the deer. I could feel the distance between us growing, even as we walked side by side. We found fresh tracks near a frozen creek, and Ethan's focus snapped back, his eyes sharp as he studied the ground. "We're getting close," he said, his voice steady but distant. I nodded, but my mind was on him and the way his hands gripped his rifle, on the tension in his shoulders, on the words he wasn't saying. We followed the tracks until dusk, the light fading fast. The forest was a maze now, every tree identical, every shadow a threat. Ethan stopped suddenly, his hand raised, and I nearly bumped into him. "There," he whispered, pointing to a clearing where a buck stood, its antlers silhouetted against the sky. He raised his rifle, his movement slow, deliberate. I watched, my heart pounding, not for the deer, but for him. His finger hovered over the trigger, but he didn't shoot. Instead, he lowered the rifle, his shoulders slumping. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. "Why not?" I asked, my voice soft. He turned to me, his eyes raw, unguarded. "Because it feels wrong. Like I'm killing something I don't understand." His words hit me like a punch, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the deer. We stood there, the buck long gone, the forest silent around us. I wanted to tell him everything about the nights I'd spent loving him in silence, about the fear that kept me quiet, about the hope that kept me close. But I didn't. Not yet. That night, the fire was small, the cold relentless. Ethan sat across from me, his face half hidden in shadow. "You ever feel like you're hiding something?" he asked, his voice low, almost afraid. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, all the time." He looked at me then, his eyes burning with something I couldn't name. "What are you hiding, Caleb?" he asked, and the question felt like a blade. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away, but he didn't move closer either. The moment hung between us, fragile and infinite, until he looked away, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely audible. "Don't be," he said, but he didn't look at me. The fire crackled, the only sound in the world, and I felt like I was drowning in everything I hadn't said. The fifth day broke with a storm, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the weight in my chest. Ethan was distant, his eyes avoiding mine as we packed up camp. I wanted to ask what I'd done wrong, but the silence between us was a wall I couldn't climb. We hiked through the rain, the forest slick and unforgiving. Ethan led the way, his steps heavy, his rifle slung low. I followed, my heart a tangle of regret and longing. I'd crossed a line last night, reaching for his hand, and now I feared I'd lost him. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick with damp. We found a cave to take shelter, its mouth wide and dark, like it could swallow us whole. Ethan built a small fire, his movements sharp, angry. I sat across from him, the silence deafening. "I didn't mean to push you," I said finally, my voice barely above the crackle of the fire. He looked at me then, his eyes fierce. "You didn't push me, Caleb. I'm the one who's messed up." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "I don't know how to say it. I don't even know what it is. But when I'm with you," he trailed off, his eyes dropping to the fire. It's different. My heart stopped, then raced. Different how? I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just stared into the flames. His hands clenched. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close, but fear held me back. Instead, I said, "You don't have to figure it out alone." He looked at me then, his eyes raw, vulnerable. "I'm scared, Caleb," he said, and the admission broke something in me. I moved closer, my hand resting on his arm, and this time, he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time, the fire dying, the cave silent. I could feel his pulse under my fingers, steady but fast, like he was running even now. I wanted to tell him I loved him, but the words felt too big, too final. Instead, I held on, hoping it was enough. The sixth day was clearer, the sky a sharp blue that felt like a lie. Ethan was quieter than ever, but there was a softness in him now, like the storm had washed away some of his walls. We hiked back toward the ridge, the hunt forgotten, the forest a backdrop to whatever was unfolding between us. We stopped by a stream, the water clear and cold. Ethan knelt to drink, and I watched, my heart aching with the weight of what I felt. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I don't know," he said, but there was no anger in it, just honesty. "I've been trying to figure it out, Caleb. What this is, what I feel." My breath caught, hope and fear colliding. "And?" I asked, barely daring to hope. He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I don't know what it means, but I know I don't want to lose you." The words hit me like a wave, and I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. "You won't," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But he just smiled, a small, tentative thing, and turned back to the stream. That night, we camped under the stars, the fire bright and warm. Ethan sat close, his shoulder against mine, and the silence between us was softer now, less heavy. We talked about small things: high school, old friends, the way the stars looked brighter out here. But beneath it all was something bigger, something we were both circling. "I've never told anyone this," he said suddenly, his voice low. "But I've always felt different, like I didn't fit. Not with the guys at the shop, not with the girls I dated, not even with my family." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "You fit with me," I said, and the words felt like a confession. He turned to me, his eyes catching the firelight, and this time, he didn't look away. "Yeah," he said softly, "I do." The seventh day felt like a turning point. The forest brighter, the air lighter. Ethan was different now, his smiles easier, his glances lingering. I felt it too, the pull between us, stronger than ever, like the tide dragging us towards something inevitable. We didn't hunt that day. Instead, we walked, talking about everything and nothing: our fears, our dreams, the lives we wanted but were too scared to chase. Ethan told me about his dad, about the pressure to be the man everyone expected. I told him about my art, about the sketches I'd never shown anyone, the ones filled with his face. By dusk, we reached a clearing overlooking the valley, the sky painted in pinks and golds. Ethan stopped, his hand brushing mine, and this time, he didn't pull away. "I've been running from this," he said, his voice low. "From you." My heart stopped, then raced. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because I'm scared," he said, his eyes meeting mine. Scared of what it means, of what people will think, but mostly scared of losing you. I stepped closer, my hand finding his. You won't lose me, I said, and this time, I didn't hold back. I leaned in, my lips brushing his, tentative and soft. He froze for a moment, then kissed me back, his hands finding my face, his touch desperate and sure. The world fell away, the forest silent, the stars above us the only witnesses. When we pulled apart, his eyes were bright, his breath uneven. I don't know what this means, he said, but he was smiling, and it was enough. That night, we lay side by side in the tent, our hands touching, our hearts open. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The final day was quiet, the forest softer, like it knew we'd found what we came for. Ethan and I packed up camp in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when words aren't needed. His hand brushed mine as we worked, and every touch felt like a promise. We didn't talk about the kiss, but it was there in every glance, every smile. The hunt was over, the deer forgotten, but we'd found something else, something fragile and real, something worth fighting for. As we hiked back to the truck, Ethan stopped, his eyes on the horizon. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice soft but steady. Back home, with everyone watching. But I want to try. With you. I took his hand, my heart full. We'll figure it out, I said. Together. The drive back was long, the Ohio roads winding through fields and small towns. Ethan's hand rested on the console, close to mine, and I knew this was just the beginning. The world would be hard as family. Our town, the expectations we'd both carried for so long. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it, because I wasn't alone. We stopped at a diner just outside Columbus, the neon sign buzzing in the dusk. Over greasy burgers and cold coffee, Ethan reached for my hand under the table, his fingers warm against mine. I'm glad we did this, he said, his eyes bright with something new hope. Maybe. Or love. Me too, I said, and I meant it. The hunt had brought us here, to this moment, to each other. And as we drove into the night, the road stretching ahead, I knew we'd keep chasing it together, no matter what.